Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Night's the Last Call. My name is Derek Melinda. Welcoming you back to another exciting live stream. Hopefully, everyone is doing well this wonderful, beautiful Tuesday. We're almost halfway through July, making our way into August. Of course, that means Gen Con is right around the corner. Looking forward to that. Yeah. Looking forward to tonight's stream. Should be an interesting one. Hopefully we can get some nice, conversation going. I'd love to hear from all of you. These sort of GM philosophy streams are definitely more about, audience participation and sort of a back and forth and really to kind of discuss some ideas with you all. Maybe give you something new to think about. Maybe give you something new to rage about. Hopefully everybody is doing well. Frostcheck says bookshelf looking pretty sweet. Yeah, I'm not quite done with it yet. I'm going to try to mount the LED up a little higher so that they're less visible. But other than that, yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Also, I need to get more power in there so that it's brighter. Although you can do this. Look at this. Woo, it's trippy. In any case, there's the orange. Anyways, as I was saying, still a work in progress, but it's nice to get the books back up there. Hard decision about what books to put on the shelf because obviously I have if you participate in our all bookshelf ranked. Oh, you like the orange? Yeah, exactly. Duha. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're in a diffuser, so that they are definitely not whatchamacallit. They are not just bare LED lights, and they are mounted in a sort of aluminum tray. But I think I can maybe do like you said, angle them a little bit. I actually think that will really, really help. Like I'm at a rave. All right. I haven't even gone through all these stupid little dumb modes. Anyways, as I was saying, I'll leave it on orange for right now. Yeah, I was actually I'm going to put it back to white so we can actually see what we're talking about here. I was it's a hard decision about what to put on my shelves because it's a tough choice. I mean, we still got stuff going on to it, of course, obviously, but do you represent the indie? I mean, obviously, I have a lot of indie games. Beyond, I mean, the only thing on this entire shelf that's Dungeons and Dragons are the first edition Player's Handbook, second edition Player's Handbook, third edition Player's Handbook, fourth edition Player's Handbook. Got some Pathfinder stuff over here, but everything else is just miscellaneous other games, but again, I still got some space left, at least that the people at home can see, because there's actually another row above this one and another row below this one, but that's just going to be kind of for the endless amounts of third edition or Pathfinder 1 books that I have, hundreds of copies of or hundreds of hardbacks. Light up when I talk. I think that would get annoying really, really quick. Where is Forbidden Lands? Right there. You can see the Bitter Reach spine right there, and then those two dark sort of leather tomes are the GM guide and the player's guide. I went overkill on the LEDs too. A million colors and endless modes, but it's always on light blue with a steady light. Yeah, I had to bust out my soldering iron. It'd been a while since I'd soldered anything, but it was a fun little project, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work on it. Like I said, I'm going to need to put a little bit more power in there, and I might mess around with some of the angles, like Doha was saying, or I think it was Doha, was saying that angling them a little bit so that you don't necessarily see the individual LEDs as much, even though they're in a sort of a channel. It's an aluminum channel with a plastic diffusing cover on it. You can still see the individual LEDs, even when they're out of focus, which, can't be perfect, but I strive for perfection. Forbidden Lands deep dive. Actually, yeah, that'd be pretty cool, Chanka. maybe we'll do that Thursday. I was kind of wondering what I wanted to do Thursday. I didn't want to go back to Pathfinder 2nd Edition. We've been talking about the game a lot, and I know next week Rage of Elements is coming out, so we're definitely going to do maybe we could put it up on the poll, but I was thinking for Rage of Elements, I might just do like going through the PDF, at least the kineticist, like every feat, really break it down, do like a complete total class deep dive, but live, right? Like having got the PDF on, I think it comes out on the 17th. So yeah, very, very cool. Yes, I know Ben did a deep dive on it as well. He and I have different opinions about Forbidden Lands, and particularly the Year Zero engine. But I have mostly good things to say about it. But there's a couple things about it that I don't love as much. But there are some other things that I really, really love about that game system. So that kind of exist outside of the Year Zero engine, specifically. So, couple things going on. Number one, we got 2 goals. We have a super chat goal, which is just supporting these kind of RPG philosophy streams. Obviously, these do not get us the views or the clout that some of the big, Pathfinder 2 streams do. So always love to put a goal out there just to show your support through your super chats for this kind of content. And then our other goal, which is a tip goal, which you can use through our link in the description below, or you can type !tip to get a link to our Stream Elements tip page. It's a large goal. Don't expect to hit it tonight. This might be a multi-stream goal. But as some of you may know, myself and the Knights, that's me, Bob, and Aaron, had a giveaway last year, which is that we are going to be building, I'm an amateur hobbyist woodworker, and we're going to be making one of our patrons who won the contest last year for being a patron. They won a custom-made, all-wood, traditional-built game table up to their specs, and we're going to deliver it. But that doesn't mean we aren't going to drive home. We're going to drive there to San Diego, but we are going to be trying to fly home. But luckily, the flights home from San Diego actually aren't that horrible. And so if you want to do the Knights a solid, that tip goal is going to be for, for that purpose. Just to maybe put some money into the Delta or the Frontier Fund so that we can fly home instead of having to drive 3 or 4 days home after driving 3 or 4 days across the country from Cleveland to San Diego to drop off a $5,000-$6,000 table that we're giving away for free. It's good times. Anyways, we might get to the whiteboard tonight. I've got it ready just in case. But tonight, I wanna talk about this idea of game master control, and specifically, this is of course, as with all good things, this came out of a conversation that several patrons and I were having last week in the Discord, the Patreon Discord, about the role of the game master and how much bias, or maybe a better question would be, is can the game master truly be unbiased? Are decisions that the game master makes, by definition, arbitrary? Now, arbitrary has sort of a connotation of being like on a whim and without any sort of, reasoning. I don't necessarily mean that. I don't know what the exact correct word is to use here, but my supposition was that a game master is always going to be affected by their own internal biases. And I've been playing, Dungeons and Dragons with people, for 30 plus years. And with some of the people who know me best, I can tell you that they get away with more. They know what my biases are. They know what I like. They know what I like to hear. They know what I think is cool. They know what I think is lame. And so whenever I'm sort of asked to make a GM call, I will be the first to admit that I am prone to being manipulated, I guess would be the term, by these biases. And one of the things I don't really like about that is that it means that the story or the game, the narrative that is unfolding becomes very, very tame. Because what ends up happening is we end up building consensus, right? We end up sort of arriving at the same place. Now, I know what people are saying. Well, that's great. That's consistency. That's, that's everything that, we want. True. But as Jonka says, right, we want to keep the narrative feral, and in that sort of respect for that, let me pull something up here real quick. Okay, big old window here. Okay, so this is from the Root RPG, by the way. And what it says here is, and this is, of course, a classic Powered by the Apocalypse sort of core agenda of Powered by the Apocalypse, which is playing to find out. Now, believe me, I understand that some people are going to have, we always play to find out. I don't have any preconceived notions or ideas. Just bear with me on this. The Root, I'll just read it because it's really well written. Root the RPG depends upon one core principle woven throughout the game from its setting to its mechanics. Play to find out what happens. There may come a time when you think you know exactly what should happen next when dealing with some eerie lieutenant. You just know that the lieutenant should hate your character and that they should wind up in a duel to the death. But let those feelings go. Play to find out what happens. Don't pre-plan. Fair enough, but it continues. The mechanics in Root the RPG push you towards unexpected, surprising outcomes. Note what they said here. The mechanics of the game, not just general philosophy, not just some suggestions that are written in the game mastery guide. No. The actual mechanics of the game are designed to push you towards unexpected and surprising outcomes. They complicate any situation where you think you know what should happen. Let the game and the story go where it will and surprise you. Don't fight the mechanics when they suggest an outcome you never would have predicted. Go with it, or go with them. The story you tell will be better for it. So there's a lot to break down in that little paragraph of text, but they're really speaking to us game masters here, because I understand that, like, for most people here probably watching this channel, you like to think, and we're all learning, we're all students of the craft. You like to think, okay, yeah, I don't have like a story written out. I don't have a pre-programmed idea. I'm not, writing out, okay, so the party will go to this exact location and then they'll talk to this person. And then after they convince this person to join them, they'll join them. But then on the way to the keep, that person will get ambushed and kidnapped by the bandits. And then the party's going to have to decide to go rescue the person or keep going to the keep. And then after they decide to go to the bandits, like, that you're not talking about literally plotting it out. Hey, Junka!
What I like about Root and other PbtA games is that the system helps prevent the GM from creating a biased railroad. Unlike 5e and PF2, the GM must follow the rules every bit as much as the players.
Yeah, Jonka, that's a really great point. Certainly one of the things that I really, really enjoy about Powered by the Apocalypse, and we can kind of get into, there's a lot to get into tonight, without getting off onto too many tangents. But I can't promise you anything, and no one watches these videos anyways, so tangents away. But as sort of a side note to this, we have our Northern Reaches mega game going on, and there's been some learning curves and friction because one of the elements about Northern Reaches Season 2, as a game master, there are, for lack of a better word, restrictions on what you as a game master can put into your dungeon or your adventure or your location. We have this whole system where game masters, the more they run their location for multiple groups of people, they essentially earn like GM XP that they can invest into their sites, so they can add more traps or secret doors or big boss monsters or whatever. But the point is, as a game master, we're used to just being able to say, I have all the control here. I can do whatever I want. It's my world. I can do whatever I want. And what ends up happening, I think, in some of those instances, is you end up playing it safe, number one. Number two, even if you're trying as hard as you can to be unbiased and and to be fair and unbiased and not motivated by your own personal experiences, the fact of the matter is they are going to creep into the experience. And you are going to find yourself sort of imagining scenarios that'll play out exactly the way that you want them to, or at least you hope they will. And someone, I think it was Boothby, who was here earlier, but said they were going to have to catch us on the VOD. I believe it was Boothby who said game mastering, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'd go look them up, but they basically said game mastering in Northern Reaches Season 2 has been really, sort of a really weird experience. I have all of these constraints, but I feel like it's made me a better game master. And I completely agree with that statement. I think that having restrictions and having constraints on what you can do with your game system actually, in my experience, breeds creativity. It doesn't limit it. I also think, quite frankly, it's easier. And an English teacher in high school once told me this. They said, if I give you a 5 sheets of blank paper and I ask you to write me a short story about anything, you might sit there and you have an hour to do it. You might sit there and spin your wheels because you can't even think of something. You could pick anything, but that having that kind of freedom can be paralyzing. Whereas if I tell you, I want you to write me a short story about an old kitchen table, or about a family gathered around a TV or an old swing. Even though I have massively constricted the creative design space for your essay or for your short story, people will find that becomes this very strong enabler and allow you to kind of write about things or go in directions that you would never have thought to go previously. And in some cases, it can actually make the experience a whole hell of a lot easier. Anything Morrow says is amazing, Sigma. I pretty much listened to, I think, every podcast of Drive to Work podcast from Mark Rosewater. Obviously, he is the GOAT. Actually, I was at Origins when he got inducted into the Gaming Hall of Fame, which was pretty sweet. That was just this a couple weeks ago. But yes, his game design talk is really, really, really good. He talks about resonance. He talks about a lot of good stuff that we should talk about. So, Powered by the Apocalypse, in particular, has this sort of philosophy woven into it, and you'll see this kind of going back even to the beginning. But obviously, Root being sort of one of the more recent versions of this, is really sort of highlighting into this idea here of not just the philosophy, but the actual mechanics of the game, pushing you towards unexpected and surprising outcomes. And again, as I was saying before I kind of got tangented, I know a lot of you here are saying, I don't, write out scripts. I don't write out novels and then make my players go through them. That's awesome. Cool. If you like that style of play and your players really like that style of play, awesome. You should do that. But, I think the genre of role-playing games is just done better by doing it this way.
Anonymous tipped $5.
Hey, Anonymous, thank you for the tip. Not sure if that was somebody, but they may have forgotten to sign their tip. But if it was you, you can go ahead and claim that. But thank you very, very much. Appreciate the support. We'll RPG! Thank you so much for that. So what's interesting about this line here, that's all right, dude. That's all right. It was our friend Doha. Thank you, Doha. Thank you for the tip. Appreciate it so much. What this is saying is going beyond just pre-writing an adventure. What this is saying, in my personal opinion, is number one, they're saying that you have mechanics that are designed to take you in interesting directions. Number two, they complicate the situation where you think you know, and they put it in quotation marks, almost to be, I don't know, kind of mocking. You know what should happen. And this is kind of at the heart of what I was talking about GM control. You see, when we think of game mastering nowadays, we have this idea born out of, I think, mostly Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, this idea that the GM is omnipotent, right? The GM is the legislative branch. They make the rules. Most GMs probably didn't 100% write their own rule set, but they can certainly amend it. They can certainly change it. They can certainly, write new laws and override old ones. So they're the legislative branch. They're also the executive branch, right? It's their job to enforce the law, they enforce the rules as they see fit. And then in the instance where there's ambiguity or something isn't clear about intention, they're also the judge, and they get to, they're the judicial branch, and they get to make that decision. So we have this concept that's been built in that the GM has all the control, and that the GM is sort of the omnipotent walking god of their RPG universe. What their word is law, and what they say goes. And that there's no way, essentially, for the GM to cheat. And while I do think that it is possible for the game master to cheat, I will say that outside or regardless of cheating, I think that when the GM has that much power and say and control, even a well-intentioned GM who's trying to keep their hands off the steering wheel is going to end up being biased and being sort of the affected by their own personal wants and desires, and they're going to end up kind of building towards safe outcomes that feel right and don't really challenge you as a game master or as a group. Because, you get to a point where we're all sort of going, yeah, okay, yeah, we should do this. The players are on board. Then you're on board and everyone's shaking their head. And suddenly your story is no longer feral. What's going to happen is exactly what everyone expects to happen. Right. And that is kind of sad. And, we were having this conversation and we were talking about on the Patreon. And I specifically brought up this passage from Blades in the Dark. So I'm going to hop over to Blades in the Dark here. And what they're talking about here is the action roll. Okay. Which, in Blades in the Dark, the action roll, if you're not familiar with Blades in the Dark, the action roll is a bit like the skill check. Okay. But action rolls sort of represent everything in Blades in the Dark. It could represent a series of activities. So, they talk about here about triggering the action roll, not necessarily doing an action roll or I'm going to do an action. It's about triggering meaning similar to Powered by the Apocalypse. We are doing something else. And it's almost like a reaction from Pathfinder 2nd edition, or like the game is like making an attack of opportunity against your story, right? You are the game master, your players are the player, you're all having your conversation. And then suddenly there's a whistle blows, flag on the play. You have triggered an action roll, right? It's like you have triggered my trap card. So the rules interject. It's not a question of if or when or GM decision. It's a question of, or not a question at all, right? The GM doesn't get to make that call. The GM doesn't get to make that decision. So I'll again quote Blades in the Dark here, which I think is well written by Mr. John Harper. The game is a conversation between the people at the table. You're talking, you're narrating your actions, you're speaking in character, you're making jokes, you're sketching maps, you're speculating about what might happen. All that good stuff. But that's just talking, right? There's this thing that happens in a role-playing game where the conversation shifts, where you go from we're just talking to we are now using a mechanic. What is that like? This shift in the conversation is the GM's responsibility. They should always be on the lookout for it, but anyone can call for it. And I would argue that, my primary role when I am at the game master table is I am trying to be the person most responsible for understanding when the rules must be obeyed. So I'm the one who is I'm the enforcer. Everyone should be looking out. Everyone should do their part to obey the laws of the game. But as a game master, I consider that to be one of my primary responsibilities. So in this particular game, Blades in the Dark, they specifically describe why would we call for a roll when we're just having a conversation? What makes us switch between we're just talking to now we're using a mechanic? And in this instance, they specifically call out a player attempts a challenging action that might be dangerous or troublesome. A player character leads or gives orders to an NPC or an NPC group, which faces something dangerous or troublesome. And as a nod to just the way the game rolls out, someone grabs the dice and gets all excited about making a roll. So at this point, the game, this is Blades in the Dark mechanics here, but we talk about setting your position and setting your effect level. And, they discuss here too. Have the other players chime in and suggest alternative position or effects, or the player revises their statement to do something more or less daring, and everyone just nods and we've shifted into using the mechanic. So, this is talking about making all these great action rolls, but there's a great line here at the end of this section. And again, talking about why and how we use this description. It says, why do we do this? Right? What, the old Knights of Last Call saying, what are we even doing here? Why do we do all this? What's the main point of this shift into a mechanic anyways? Remember, we were talking. We were having a conversation. You do something, I do something. You describe your character's actions, I respond with what's going on in the city or with what the NPC is doing. We're just talking. And at one point, we shift into a mechanic, not because we want to, but because we have to. So why do we do this? Why don't we just talk it out? Right? Why don't we just resolve things by just deciding? And this might sound like strange advice. The main reason is this. When we just talk things out, we tend to build consensus. And I think a lot of people are surprised by that. This is usually a good thing. It helps the group bond, gets us all on the same page. It sets expectations, all that stuff. But when it comes to action adventure stories like Blades in the Dark, or probably your Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons game, we don't want consensus when the characters go into danger. We want to be surprised or thwarted or driven to bigger risks or inspired to create twists or complications. We want to raise our hands over our heads and ride the roller coaster over the drop. When the mechanic is triggered, the group first dips into being authors for a moment as they suss out the position, the threats, the details of the action. Then the author mode switches off for everyone, including the game master. And everyone gets to become the audience. What will happen next? We hold our breaths, lean forward in our seats, and let the dice fall. So this advice can seem crazy when you think about what a game master is trying to do at a game group. Don't we want to build consensus? Don't we want to put everybody on the same page? Don't we all want to sort of be nodding and agreeing with each other? John Harper says no. John Harper is saying that is usually good stuff. But when we're talking about the sort of action adventure that is really driving our story, that is where we don't want to build consensus. We don't want to just talk it out. We want to let the dice decide. And the dice are the most powerful tool that the game master has in order to disclaim decision making, to say, it's not up to me. We're going to leave it up to the dice and allow the dice to sort of set the tone of what's going to happen. And that could be really exciting, and it could be really exciting for the game master. It could be really exciting for the players. And of course, obviously, most of these games have character building aspects that allow the players to specifically manipulate those mechanics, either giving them additional options or increasing their chances of success or mitigating some of the consequences of failure. So that is, hey, we got a super chat coming in from the Purple GM. Welcome back, Purple GM. Love to see it. Reminds me of BG3 Funny Problem, where the player needs a black box. They created 30 plus ways for you to get the box, and if you dodge it all, it just lands on your head, and it's clear the story is on a track and you can't get off. I have not, assuming BG3 is Baldur's Gate 3. I have not played Baldur's Gate 3. I mean, that is obviously one of the critical problems for any computer-based RPG, where there's only so many ways that, I mean, they can't literally do any single ending, and they can't literally do have everything plotted out. So at certain points, they give you this sort of illusion of choice, and, it ends up sort of, unfortunately being the case where, I mean, I've seen it. I've even seen it in adventure paths, right? Where it's like, they'll be like, oh, it's totally fine if this NPC dies. But when they get to the point later on in the story, the NPC's brother shows up or sister shows up, and she basically just fills the exact same role as you would have if you hadn't done it. Because that story needs to continue, and for it to continue, it needs to have these certain, checkpoints or these certain things. But thank you for the super chat, Purple GM. Almost halfway through our super chat tip goal of supporting the RPG philosophy. So, I saw some people made some comments. I do want to kind of roll back up here to talk about them, and we can kind of discuss this. But I wanted to kind of make sure that I kind of got my initial sort of statement out there, which is we understand that, like, and this is where I guess I feel as a game master, where I feel the most empowered, is when I know what my job is, and I don't have to worry about whether I am being unfair or biased by my own emotional or my own philosophical or my own, my own personal tastes. And I always worry that at a certain point, the game has become less about these heroic characters or villainous characters in the case of Scum and Blaze in the Dark or Scum and Villainy, on an adventure dealing with the threats around them. And what it's really become is a game of Mother May I. I use the term, Aaron and I both use the term GM pixel bitching. And if you don't know what pixel bitching is, back in the day, there used to be these click and point games. Sierra made a bunch of them where you would have to click around you'd have to do something on the screen. Shadowgate for the Nintendo was one example of this, Deja Vu. And the idea of what pixel bitching was this idea that, like, if you clicked here, nothing would happen, but they needed you to click right there. Yeah. King's Quest is the king of pixel bitching. If you type, open gate, and it goes, well, the gate will not open. You're like, open doorway. The doorway, there's no doorway here. Open portal. Oh, that's what you meant. Okay, you had to say it the right way for the door to open. Okay, so that's pixel bitching. GM pixel bitching is just the verbal oral equivalent of doing that with your GM, right? Where you're kind of basically fishing and you're basically kind of saying like, well, what if I do it this way? And don't forget, I have this and this and this. So that should allow me to succeed. Or if I make this point and this point and this point, that NPC should respond. And then the GM's kind of like, well, I don't know about this. And the player goes, okay, well, what if I try this and that and this? It's, you're pixel bitching with your GM. You're trying to just figure out what is the exact right thing to say that will get the GM to nod their head and go along with your plan, or to have the NPC be convinced, or to, do any of a number of things in your game. But worse than that, and again, this is where I am just and this is something I learned from Ben Asaro on our Patreon. Ben has a slightly different tactic than me. We can talk about that. Ben uses random tables, oracles, to sort of remove his bias. Ben will, rather than Ben sort of decide what happens, Ben will roll on a table, and then it's his job to sort of take that random outcome and make it come to life. Ben will make a decision or a judgment call, but then roll on the table to see what ends up happening as a result of that consequence. But the point is the same. We both feel like we don't want our games to just be the safe output of my limited imagination, of my limited creativity. And most important for me, I don't want my players to be playing the game of, I need to convince Derek. It's not about my character, and it's not about that situation, right? It's more of like, can I, the player at the table, through my character, of course, but really what I'm doing is it's me, the player, talking to the game master. And I don't have to convince the prince. I don't have to convince the guard captain. Who I really need to convince is the game master. Because if I say the right thing to this game master, maybe a game master I've known for a very, very long time, then I am playing a different game then. Because now what we're doing is we're building consensus. The players are just doing the thing that they know is going to get them to success. And that thing of success is based off of what they know are my biases. Like, I mean, you all, even here, probably from hanging out with me, watching me GM, talking with me, what are some of my biases and things like that. If you were trying to convince, during a game, Derek of something, you probably wouldn't want to lean really hard on like the, oh, but it's so cute route. Wouldn't the prince want a little pup? Wouldn't the prince want a little, I don't know, little leshy puppy pet or something like that? That wouldn't work on me. But I can think of many game masters and players out there who would probably be like, oh, you're so cute. It is so cute. And, yeah, I'm gonna, give it to that. Yeah. Purple GM. Exactly. You're playing Cards Against Humanity, playing the cards that your friends would find funnier. It's not necessarily even that it's funny. It's just that your friends, so you are picking the card that is going to make it so that that's the one they pick. You're not actually trying to make the thing that makes the most sense. You're not trying to make the thing that is the funniest. You're trying to pick the one that you go, I know that Jenny will pick this. And so I'm playing to the person rather than playing to the scenario. Now, dice are great friends here because dice allow the GM to remove their level of bias. They remove the GM's level of control. But there's a problem, which Powered by the Apocalypse and Blades in the Dark games have kind of solved if you do it correctly. And the problem is this. Many GMs believe or will say, well, I use the dice, and that means, I am not biased. Okay, when do you use the dice? When I think it's appropriate. That means that what you're basically saying is your bias is still the primary decider about whether or not we are going to resolve something through a random outcome or through a choice. It's sort of like it's like being the president of your company or something like that, or the CEO of your company, and saying like, we have conducted an internal investigation and, determined that the CEO and the president did nothing wrong at the company. And it's like, well, who's the person making that decision? Well, the CEO or the president. It's like, it's kind of not fair. What I really like is playing a game, and we talked about this at the beginning, where the standard model of the omnipotent GM is that they are the legislation, they're the executive branch, and they're the judicial branch. What I kind of like is a game where the legislation, the rules, the law of the game is off limits. That is codified. That is sacrosanct. Even I, the GM, cannot simply choose which laws to enforce or choose which rules I will ignore at my pleasure or leisure. No, I am honor bound, duty bound to execute those rules. Now, of course, this implies that the rules have a defined, structured agenda. And if you look at most non-D20 games, you'll generally find, like that root example I showed at the beginning, the rules and the mechanics of this game there's an agenda built into them. They are trying to accomplish something. They just need you, the GM, to get the hell out of the way. So the rules become the legislation. The GM becomes the executor. They become the executive branch. Your job is to sort of remind people what the rules are, the laws are, to make sure that the rules are applied appropriately. And then for the judicial component, it's more of a group decision. And you try to remove as much of that GM bias as you possibly can. And I believe fully that this creates a better gaming experience. I think it's more interesting. Number one, it's more fun for the GM. I honestly, truly believe that for me as a game master, and again, I understand not everybody's the same, but for me as a game master, my favorite moment at a table is a moment where I can feel it. The players are doing something and I understand. I'm like, oh, that's what they're trying to do. And we're moving towards this really cool critical decision point. And there's this still, even with me, there's still this strong urge to say like, yeah, that totally works. Or yes, the NPC would totally agree to that. And they say yes. But I also understand that for me, part of the fun moment is when you let go and you let the dice rolls or you let the oracle table take you someplace crazy, someplace completely unexpected, someplace you would never, ever have gotten on your own. And the wild, chaotic fumbling that occurs after those events, that's my favorite moment as a game master, is seeing those dice fall, realizing that the dice have chosen for us. We're going down this path. And now as a GM, responding to that and, doing all of the sudden mental gymnastics, the sort of juggling act that is going to go on to make this part of our narrative. Okay. I see Roll for Combat's here. And, Roll for Combat, a great example of this. When we talked about this a little bit, but when we were playing Avatar, The Last Airbender RPG, Avatar Legends RPG at Origins, his character, this famous earthbender, this would-be, sort of champion of the Earth Kingdom, enemy of the Fire Nation, came into town to sort of as a distraction, and the Fire Nation was going to attack him. And he said, no, you were all mistaken. All of those people that, your brothers and sisters in arms who were defeated in battle, that was not me. That was somebody else. I mean, yeah, it's funny and we're all laughing. Obviously it's a convention game, but I go, no, look, I don't get to decide that. This game cares about when people lie. It has a rule for this. Okay. And we're going to roll trick an NPC, and he rolled double sixes. And so suddenly I don't even remember what I had planned, but suddenly that doesn't matter. That's thrown out the window because a player chose to take an action that involved the dice and the dice told us we are going a different fucking direction. And strap in, everybody, because it's going to get crazy and it's going to go wild. And rather than trying to always steer everything back to the middle, you ever do that? You probably have. I'm telling you, you have as a game master. And as a player, I am sure you have seen your game masters do this, where your game master basically, like, you're going along this kind of rough path or channel of adventure. And the player goes, can I do this thing? And the GM goes, yeah, of course. I'm an open-minded GM. I'm going to let you do something. And you got to go, cool. And you do your little thing. And they go, yeah, that was really successful. That is definitely going to help you on your continuing journey as you continue your way, to the place. And then the player goes, well, I want to try this different thing. And I want to do something different. And the GM goes, I'm a very open-minded GM. Yeah, make a dice roll. And the player fails. And you're like, oh, okay, well, there's a little bit of a problem, but, the other players are going to have to carry extra weight because the GM and the group are all trying to kind of ignore the rules. They're trying to just make something safe happen. Everybody wants for the thing that they're imagining to happen. And all these pesky rules keep getting in the way. I mean, that's honestly the most frustrating part for me, where as a player, you say, I want to do this thing. And then the GM asks for a die roll and you make the die roll. And it's not even clear what failure or success really actually ended up doing. It didn't really matter. And then you get the sneaking suspicion, and you're probably right, that you're like, you know what? I'm willing to bet that if I hadn't made that die roll, we probably would have ended up in the exact same location or the exact same situation. Because while I'm not saying that the GM wouldn't have taken that dice roll under, advisement, they also wouldn't have, I think, they have a goal. The GM has an agenda that they are trying to push, the game towards. And I think naturally the GMs tend to be kind of defensive about it. They're gonna, it's hard to kill your babies. And they're like, oh, I have this cool idea. And man, I hope the players and the rules and the dice rolls don't fuck up this cool idea. And I think that no matter how hard you try, that as a GM, as a human being, you cannot get rid of that level of bias. Matthew Keen, by the way, Matthew is still the hype boss after an absolutely massive donation last week. Matthew Keen said, did you say Leshy puppy? Yeah, I did say Leshy puppy. Puppies are cute. They're like the only thing I think are cute. Except maybe this little guy. Hello. I'm Kitopass. I think I'm Earth. Yeah, Earth Cat. Meow, Kitopass. All right, anyways. Check it out. rollforcombat.com. I did say Leshy puppy. So, Roll for Combat enjoyed that. Now let the dice roll to see if the prince is allergic to some plants. To be fair, I have my box from Origins over here, Steven, and so I have all the plushies right there. So they are in my game room though. So I see Boto over there as well. No, now here's where, and this is important, Matthew. I want to be clear about this something, because I think that this is also a mistake. Is okay, so the GM doesn't make any decisions. The GM just gonna roll randomly for every fucking thing in the game. No, that is also stupid. GMs are there to serve a very important purpose. But the game, a good game, will tell you. And I'll be honest with you, I'll critique Pathfinder 2 here as an example of this. The game will tell you whether something's important or not. If you look at a Powered by the Apocalypse game, you will see that they might only have 7 or 8 or 9 moves in the game. And that is the game telling you this is what this game cares about. This game cares about lying to NPC. This game cares about battling with NPCs. This game cares about persuading NPCs. This game cares about doing roguish feats. Right? That's root. basically the distinction of it is, it's like which amendment is it? Is it the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution? Yes, the 10th Amendment, rights reserved to the states and the people. I talked about it before. The rules are like a constitution. They're the law of the land. And the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So what this is saying is basically, look, the Constitution is saying this is the stuff that we care about. This is what we have power and authority over. Anything else, we don't really fucking care. So those rights can go to the states and those rights can go to the people. It's the same thing with running a game. A game like Root or a game like Avatar is going to tell you, hey, this is what this game cares about. These are the law of the land. And if it's not one of the, 5, 6, 7, 8 things that the game cares about, then yeah, GM, do whatever you want. Make a decision. Go with whatever your gut tells you. Roll a random die. It doesn't fucking matter, because at this point, the game is saying you are following the game rules as we have stipulated out. But when it comes to those 5 or 6 or 7 things that we really care about, that the rules really care about, that is not up for you to decide whether you're going to follow them this time or not follow them this time or do something different this time. No. You would be breaking the law. You would not be doing your job as the executive branch. States' rights equals GM rights. That's right. That's exactly right. Listen, you get some crazy stuff here on the Knights of Last Call. And including comparing the United States Constitution and the federal branches of government to how RPG theory works. Speaking of crazy stuff on Knights of Last Call, I do want to take a quick moment to give a shout out to our 7 legends who, we mentioned this last week, but, I'm going to take this opportunity to give them a sort of a shout out, at least every couple streams, because they, really have stepped up and have absolutely made a massive commitment to this channel. So I do want to say personal thanks to Karumak, Whoopelstein, Ryan Dale, Rick Sherman, GM Scott, Laughing Outlaw, and Donnie Taylor for being our legend tier patron members. So thank you all for your continued support. And again, many blessings to you and yours. All right. Derek never plays anything on rails. Even my streams go off rails. That is very true. Hey, there he is. Rick Sherman himself. Rick, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you. Legends of the 7 legends. Yes. Thank you, Ryan. Love it. Love to see the legends in the chat. That will make a new RPG, Legend of the 7 Legends. Okay, so it's 8:00. That was like my hour-long rant. Let's conversate. I'm gonna take your calls. If I miss you, sorry. Obviously throw it in a super chat or tip. I'll definitely see it, but I will try to get some of the stuff. If you said stuff earlier, sorry, I probably missed it because I was ranting and looking at stuff. All right, Ayla, who is one of the people I was having this conversation with, says there is a distinction to be made between what the game claims to care about and what it actually cares about. That is very true. PF2 seems on the surface to care about the existence of rations, but it absolutely does not. And I'll be honest with you, this is one of the this is absolutely one of the problems that I have with games like Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Is you look at a game like Pathfinder 2nd Edition and I ask you, what is this game about? And do the mechanics of the game support it? And do all of the functional features of the game make sense? And the answer, unfortunately, for most modern D20 types games is sometimes it's like, no, it doesn't really seem to matter at all. We've talked about this on the Patreon Discord, but if you look at the starvation rules in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, they are so generous that you essentially, you would never have to eat ever, basically, and be totally fine. So like the existence of rations, and then you go, okay, but they included rations anyways. Okay, yeah, but a week's worth of food. So you're like, oh, because they're making a nod to simulationism, right? We want people to feel like they're adventuring over the overlands, and that food and ration management's important. But then they made food a week's worth of rations, by the way, not one bulk, okay? Light bulk. Light bulk. That's 1/10 of a bulk. That is 1/20th of the bulk of a gnomish flick mace. Which actually it's down to one bulk now. So it's 1/20th of a bulk of like a pole arm or of your armor. It is an unbelievably small amount of weight and encumbrance. So much to the point where it doesn't fucking matter. So which is it? Like, the game has rations, it has rules for starving to death, but the rules aren't really punishing you because of how generous the starvation dice are. But then when you go and take and you find, fine, fuck it, I'm going to take the rations, it applies essentially no cost to you, right? Because it's just light bulk. It doesn't even matter. So what is the game trying to tell you about what it cares about? Should you care about rations? Should you care about starvation? Should you care about how much the PCs are eating? Yes or no? And the game seems to indicate it has all of these things in existence. But I can tell you that between the fact that a week of rations is light bulk and the fact that the starvation rules are so generous, it essentially doesn't matter. You want to know what the worst part is? You know what the worst part is? All right, we're going deep here. Okay. There exists an item. It came out in the APG. All right. Now, again, as established, we're gonna pull this up so people don't say I'm a cheater. Not a cheater, but you know what I mean. Okay, here we go. Copy window capture. Yes. Okay. Right. We've got Nethys. All right. Here's our archives of Nethys. All right. Here is a ration. Right. Right. You, me, we love it. Item level 0. It is 4 silver pieces for 1 week. Okay. And it is bulk light. All right. Bulk light, meaning 1/10 of a bulk for a week. Okay. For a week of rations. Now that is, now to be honest with you, there's no real description of what rations are, but we assume it's like hardtack and dried meats and fruits and, like that kind of things. So then they create this, an alchemical item, a magical item. It is the ration tonic. It is a vial, a potion that you can drink, and it magically nourishes you for the equivalent of a day's worth of food. Clearly, this is this like wonder food pill that you can eat and drink and be completely fed for a day. Guess what? 1 ration tonic is light bulk. So if you wanted a week of magical drinks, it would take 7 light bulk. Whereas an entire week of actual food is just light bulk. Now, I know this isn't like a big deal, and to be honest with you, it really isn't. But this is an example where it's like, okay, what the game is caring about doesn't seem to function within the structure of how these mechanics are actually playing out. So anyways, the ration part definitely threw me for that. Let me see. We're talking about Lembas bread. Damian Williams says, Derek, give everyone a shout out for me. Booked my flight home. I am very, it's a bittersweet, Damian. I am glad that you're going to be able to go home and be with your family during this tough time. Obviously, I wish it was under better circumstances, but hopefully you can find some peace and comfort. And big shout out to everybody from either our Knights of Last Call community or the Patreon community who chipped in with Damien's GoFundMe. So you definitely have my sincerest appreciation and for that, and many blessings to you and your family, Damien, as you deal with the loss in your family. Rick says, that's why I like the resource management hack that Derek put into Quest for the Frozen Flame AP. Yeah, I mean, that was an absolute, I can't even imagine running that game, Rick, without that resource management hack, because, what else would we be doing? Ayo. We just had, what was that? Hey, Ryan, Blue Thunder, 10 months resub. Thank you so much for that, for being a sponsor. So yeah, I really enjoyed that resource hack because it made the choices interesting, and the players had, and I didn't have an agenda. I did not have like they must do this, they must do that. In fact, part of the beauty of that, Rick, I've talked about this before on the stream, but I want to talk about it again, is again, my bias doesn't go into it, because I did have a bias, Rick. I absolutely had a bias. I had the adventure path that was convenient for both time purposes. Also, and when I say time, I don't just mean, creating my own stuff, my own adventure stats, but we're running a show. It's on Foundry. It's on, it's online. I want it to look good. By using a pre-published adventure path, I had access to maps and NPCs that had already been built by other people. I could use the PDF importer at the time to bring all that information into Foundry. Made it a lot easier and quicker for me for a better turnaround, because I had other things to worry about, like not just running a game, but running a show. So my personal GM bias was, I don't want this adventure path to go completely off the rails, because then I don't get to use all of this really convenient, helpful stuff. But I was like, but what doesn't actually matter, in a sense, but I mean, matters a great deal to the players of the game, is the actual Broken Tusk tribe itself. They could get wiped out to a man, woman, and child, and the players could still beat the AP, do the things that the AP expects them to do, get the Frozen Flame, beat the lady at the end, kill Pakano. So that meant that part of the game was very feral. It was very hands-off. It was very, we don't know what's going to happen here. Is this balanced? Is this fair? What is the right decision? Nobody knew, including me, the game master. I didn't know. I did no idea what results were going to come out of that. And that's what made that, I think a lot of people responded very positively, that mechanic, as you did, because that was an example of where I, the GM, I had my hands off. I had no personal stake in that, outcome. And that's what made it so, so interesting, so feral. I spent the entire second book of Age of Ashes foraging for food with my ranger during the Hexploration in Mwangi, it felt like. Well, I can't speak to that adventure path, but you probably could have been good to go for like weeks without food. Honestly, the PF2 starvation rules are like insane. Yeah, you can go without water for a number of days equal to your con modifier +1. So already you're like talking like 3 to 4 days without water for a lot of characters. And then after the same amount of time without food, you take 1 damage a day that cannot be healed until you eat. But I mean, a third or fourth level character, with 50, 60 hit points, I mean, they could literally go 50 days, 54 days without food. I mean, yeah, you're losing a hit point a day, but I'm not suggesting that you would be optimal to go fight a combat after you haven't eaten for 49 days. But generally speaking, when you can go many, many, many dozens of weeks while still functioning in the game completely unhindered or unharmed, yes, you're fatigued, which means you can't take exploration activities and get like a -1 to your AC. But like, you could still use all of your spells and powers and features. So it's kind of crazy. All right, so let's see here. Ayla says the notion I'm getting at here is that if a game system loses nothing of value if the GM chooses to ignore things that aren't really important. If you ignore skirmish combat in Legend of the Five Rings, it's still Legend of the Five Rings. If you ignore skirmish combat in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, what the hell is even less? And Ryan said recall knowledge. I think that's a good point, Ayla, and I do definitely concede that. But I think what I'm trying to get at is it's not about whether the rules specifically care about something. It's about, is this a dramatic and tension-filled moment? So, for example, you may remove the skirmish rules for Legend of the Five Rings because you don't want to do turn-based initiative combat. But what I would do instead is probably replace that with like a one-roll melee check. And it's like if the party succeeds, they win the fight, but maybe they're really messed up. If they succeed by a margin of 2 or 3 successes, then they walk away unscathed. If they fail the check, then they might be, badly injured or scarred. And if they fail the check by 2 or 3 points, they're dead. And I would just condense that entire 4 or 5 round skirmish into just one super important roll. Because the key thing about it is the outcome is still one that I want to have my hands off the wheel. Again, I am totally fine with GMs making decisions about things that aren't important. When the players ask, when the players go into town and they're just fresh into town, they go into the bar, they ask for a drink. Does that need to be a request action? No, of course not. But if the players if this is supposed to be a dramatic moment and the players are supposed to be making their case, pleading with the general to call off the attack, that to me is a dramatic moment. And that's one where, as a game master, I'm more interested in having my hands out of the decision making and letting the dice really decide where we're going to go with that. Whether it's social combat, exploration mode, all these things, I think that's where it becomes more interesting because it's a very exciting, intense moment. And maybe there's a tendency as a game master to want to build consensus, kind of meet in the middle and sort of, force everybody in. Matthew is talking about Age of Ashes. Says it had its own rules. All right. So they kind of had their own things there, but fatigue was a pretty normal state. I mean, at least I respect that. Shadram says, wait, so 20th level characters only need to eat once per year just because they're good at wizarding or fighting? That is absolutely right, Shadram. I mean, technically your character has hit point damage, but that doesn't really do that. You can't heal until you eat. But more important than that, like once you eat, you can then recover all your hit points on a long rest. So it's kind of like, yeah, you could probably get away with eating once or twice a year. Jonka with the $2 superset says, Cthulhu, take the wheel. My phone lags so much, fast forward super chat is relevant. I assume you're talking about Jonka when I was talking about letting chaos reign. Damien says, one thing that makes me like Advanced 5th Edition is that they made exploration and rations matter. If you don't have enough supply when you long rest, you suffer a penalty for the next day. Ayla says, that's my point, though. Legend of the Five Rings can resolve combat by other means. Yes, it can resolve combat by other means, but it's still resolving the combat through a random outcome, through a unbiased GM decision. I just think that, like, as a game master, I think game masters have too much control. I mean, is what it really comes down to. I know that sounds crazy, but I think that the game becomes better when the GM isn't 100% in charge. I think when the GM cedes control and to other aspects, whether it's the players or random oracle tables or, 2d6 PbtA rolls or whatever, what have you, I just feel like that takes the game in a more interesting direction. And I'm not saying that that's always the case, but I think that as a game master, I would encourage you to really, take a step back and sort of really look at your own biases and really think about how you are affected. And you know, I mean, I'll give you a great example of this, right? I'm definitely paraphrasing this, but like something like 80% of people when surveyed say they're unaffected by marketing, which is obviously the most bullshit statement of all time. Of course you're affected by marketing. Otherwise they wouldn't market. Everybody's affected by marketing. The people who think that they're not affected by marketing are probably the people who are the most strongly affected by marketing. So there's this idea that some GMs have where they're like, no. I am making this decision completely, fairly. Or if it's an NPC that's being the players are talking to, I am that NPC and there is no shred of my, no, of course there is. Of course you're being manipulated. Of course the players are playing to your likes and dislikes and they're trying to tell you what you want to say. So yeah, you're being affected. Our friend Stephen Palmer is here. He says, the problem with many GMs is that they believe they are the owner of the story and that the game belongs to them. The game belongs to the table. The GM is a special role that facilitates, not own the game. And that kind of gets to what I was talking about before. It's like, I am fine being the executive branch of the sort of federal system, but I don't want to be, judge, jury, and executioner. I just want to be one part of that. I want to be a player too. And I think that, we've come a long way from the days, where like the first edition D&D DMG would say like, if you discover that a player has read from this sacred tome, they must be banished. They must be cast out. They must be made to live on the outskirts of civilization, eking in existence from rocks and dust. Like, we've come a long way from that. And I think that this idea of the game master supremacy, I think is a little bit of a toxic trait. I think even the term game master, outside of any sort of political loaded terms about master, I think that it implies that you are ultimately the one. Banish them to the worst of milieus. That's so good. I think that. I think that, when you read it, you pick up an RPG, the first thing it says is like, this is your game. Do whatever you want. And then we just see that like Reddit and, Twitter and all the stuff are just rampant. And certainly the Pathfinder 2 subreddit are just rampant with people being like, hey, I took the D&D game and I did something completely different with it. And it's like not working. And people go, of course it's not working, you asshole. Like the game wasn't meant to do that. Or like, somebody plays Pathfinder 2nd edition and apparently, strips everybody's ability to take actions and do anything and then says, oh, Pathfinder 2 is a horrible game. Yeah, gee, you think? And that it's gotten to the point now where there are some people who go, like, you should follow the rules by all means necessary. And that's fine. You're like, Derek, weren't you just espousing that? Yeah, in games that have like, hey, look, we care about 5 or 6 things and we have rules for like 5 or 6 things. Some of these games, like Pathfinder 2, have a fucking rule for everything. Like everything. Like honestly, I'm asking this group here, has anyone ever had, I don't know, an exciting open lock sequence that I should know about? Like that whole mechanic is just flawed. It's just so flawed. It's just fundamentally completely flawed. The failure is definitely not interesting, which is obviously the most common outcome. The success, generating +1 success towards opening the lock. And then, of course, critical failure, which has the massive, cost of a broken lock pick, which is like 1 silver or something insane. And like someone gets a critical success on picking the lock and you're like, you got 2 successes. You only need 1 more. What? And then you're just rolling, you're just spamming dice. It just, I don't even understand what this is supposed to be about. All right, let me see if I see. Roll for Combat says, I'm not affected by marketing, but I am affected by Derek. I'm gonna drink some. You should pick up Horizon Thunder Sphere. It's a good spell. Speaking of, just tangent. Tentatively, tentatively, I am excited about the Kineticist. That does look pretty sweet. NoNet did his preview. Looks like there's some cool shit going on there. It looks like they not just fix the stuff from the playtest, but like they are continuing to actually learn how their game engine works. And these new classes, boy, I got to tell you, it is going to be tough to play, CRB classes in some cases, because the streamlinedness, the awareness of how action economy actually matters is so evident in these newer classes that I am very cautiously optimistic. Hey, GM Scott, one of our legends, is in the house.
Just got here. Love the new lights.
Oh, thank you, GM. Thank you, GM Scott. You know what I need to do? So I might buy, right now it just has like this really cheap microcontroller that I got off of Amazon, but there is a part of me that wants to get, just because I've been wanting to play around with it for a long time. And so I wanted to kind of I love Mark Roper, or Stuff Made Here, like that guy. I don't know if you've ever watched Stuff Made Here. Hey, Neil
tipped $5. I've been feeling that for a bit. I am not a fan of the term Dungeon Master or GM as it sounds too omnipotent. I thought for Pathfinder they could use the term Path Guide.
Guide is a better term. I agree with you. I mean, outside again of any like political connotations, master slavery, like I understand that some people are uncomfortable with that term. But I do think that the word master has a place in our lexicon. But I also think that like the idea that I, as the game master or the dungeon master, and this supreme authority in my game, I just don't think that that's good for anybody. So I kind of feel you there, Neil. Thank you for the tip. But going back to GM Scott, I want to get like an Arduino or some sort of like microcontroller that I can connect through Bluetooth and have it do something where like when people tip or something like that, like it starts like, doing something crazy, and changes the colors, or, like they blink back and forth or something like that because, somebody tipped a lot of money or something like that. And so I thought that would be pretty fun to do that. So again, that's more of like Derek wants to learn how to do like microelectronics and stuff like that and get more use out of his soldering gun. So, but that might be something that we end up doing here. Okay, catching up here. Thank you, Neil and Scott, for both those tips. I never buy anything on Prime Day while I look at Prime Day sales. So I have a bias. I found that I am pretty stress fatigue adverse. I tend not to use it in PbtA or Forged in the Dark games unless they're in a not controlled situation. I probably could have used it more in my Candela game I ran, which is crazy. I love stress and fatigue. Those are like some of my favorite mechanics in those games. I think they're pretty good. But yeah, there you go. You're acknowledging your bias. To be fair, Ryan, I mean, in Forged in the Dark games, or at least Blades in the Dark, Scum and Villainy, it's really the player who is responsible for their stress management, right? Because as the game master, you are just saying, the game rules have decreed, the law has decreed that the outcome of your action is X. And sometimes that is the outcome is GM, you decide what happens. And I might decide, oh, you know what? Because you flubbed that roll, the woman you're talking to kicks you out and never wants to speak to you again. And the player can go, I'm going to resist that consequence because I don't want that to be the case. And I'm willing to risk some of my stress in order to achieve that control of the situation, with the understanding that, number one, that control is limited. And number two, that if I overpush that, I will eventually suffer trauma and therefore permanent character changes in a direction that is usually not positive. Damien, the classic, but my story, it's not just about the story. I think as a group, we kind of understand like, oh, the hardcore railroad GM story thing. Like, I think we're all past that generally, most of us. I'm talking about like the micro story, right? I'm talking about like that moment in the game, that one encounter, that one round, that one NPC. And you just have this idea of like, it should go like this. Or like the players say something and you go and you find yourself being convinced by the player. Now, who's being convinced there? Is that the NPC? Is that the dungeon? Is that the world being convinced? Or is that you being convinced? And now there's a certain thing to say that maybe that's what people really enjoy. Maybe they really enjoy convincing their game master. Maybe that is what they get the most enjoyment out of. I really enjoy trying to think of solutions or lines of rhetoric that I can throw at my game master to get them to do what I want them to do. I mean, maybe that's a weird it's like a weird debate team kind of version of role-playing games, but I like dice. So, Dead Meat says, I always hated the notion of GM versus the players. As a GM, I am also there to enjoy the story. And, that's again where I feel like me not having to worry about, do I make a call or do I roll the dice? And when the game rules have decided that for me, it means I get to sit back and enjoy the game just as much as everybody else. Ryan says, boy, did I love playing Trophy. I just asked some leading questions and pulled from the incursions in the book. Very little bit of it was my story. And, and I think Ryan brings up an interesting point here too. Don't listen, the role of the game master, look at the United States, right? The law is the law, but obviously, who the president is has a big influence on how that law is executed upon and how that law is sort of flavored, if you will. And so a game master absolutely has a critical role at the table. They absolutely, their wisdom, their inputs, these are all things that are very, very needed for the game to function. Because if you didn't have a game master, you would have to have a mechanic for everything. And again, I'm pointing fingers at certain RPGs here that might have a mechanic for everything. But you don't need to have a mechanic for everything when you have a game master. But what I am saying is that if something is important, I don't think that the game master should just be deciding what that is. I mean, of course you can. You could decide anything you wanted to. But I think that game is going to be not as fun for the game master, and I think it's not going to be as challenging for the game master, and I don't think it's going to be as feral or interesting of a story. Matthew says, I have this amazing story about PF2 detect magic situation. Oh, all right. I don't know if you shared it for us, but I'll look to it. Roll for Combat says, I can link you to the actual plays of trying to unlock a lock during traps going off and killing the characters. All right, that's probably a good example then. Whereas Ryan says the multiple successful lockpick checks are so silly. Talking about the kineticist, yes, that is. I said cautiously optimistic, and this is the reason why I'm worried about proficiency scaling. Yeah. I mean, we know that only some classes are only being, affected skin deep. I don't know that we're going to see, and we'll probably go into this when we cover the preview or the review when we get the actual copy of the PDF. But like the way that they've changed channel elements so that it takes an action to channel your element, which you basically need to do in order to do anything. And essentially it's kind of like a version of rage or hunt prey or reloading your spell strike in a way. It's kind of a mix of all those. But the key thing is right from the get-go, when you take the one action to channel your elements, you get an immediate refund of one action that you can only use to do either an elemental blast or a stance infusion, one action stance infusion, or a one action elemental blast. So it's limited. That's fine, because I actually think that's flavorful. If it didn't cost anything, it wouldn't feel like anything, which is totally acceptable. But in a game where actions are at such a premium, especially compared to certain classes like the rogue and the fighter, who don't necessarily have to have those, being able to get that action back, but having it be very thematically tied into what your character class is all about, I think it's just top-notch design. Um, Ayla says, so the first step to at least partially mitigating your own bias is acknowledging that every decision you make as a GM is influenced by your own experiences and interpretations. Now, that is true, but this is also why, in a game like Root or other Powered by the Apocalypse games, it's not the GM's call about whether or not the rule applies. I have been playing before where, someone starts to do something and I start to make a call and they go, no, wait. Isn't that this move? Shouldn't that trigger? And it's not like I get to make the call. It's like a kind of a group decision. And it's kind of like, yeah, no, that is you're right. I was wrong. Like that. I don't have power here. You have no power here, wizard. Right. My hands are off. My hands are tied, I should say. Rick says, in the old school war games, referee was used heavily. Since Mark Miller was influenced heavily by tactical war games, he just kept using the term for traveler. Yeah. Powered by the Apocalypse games, old school ones, use the term master of ceremonies, the MC. Steven says, how many times do GMs cheat fudge just because they have to convince themselves that they know best instead of trusting the players and letting the story game play out? My guess is a lot. I think that a lot of people may not be aware that they're doing that. And that's fine, because if you're having a great experience with your players, I think that that's totally fine. But I think it's not about whether, I'm not trying to say that your group is bad or that you're not having a good time when you play your game. Of course you are. Otherwise you wouldn't be playing it. What I am saying is I think you're missing out. I think that there's something there. I think that it's a unique, it's truly what makes this genre of games thrilling and unique. And it makes it something wholly distinct from any other form of sort of collaborative or group experience. And I really enjoy that feeling of, being along for the ride. Not just, because I think a lot of people say, oh, the GM is, they're steering the bus. But in a way, it's like, no, I'm kind of on the same ride as the rest of you. We're just having a conversation. And I'm just reminding us when the rules, and you could too, but one of my main jobs is just being, your main job is being the kick-ass lead star actor, actress, or whatever of this movie, of this narration, of this fiction. My job is to sort of handle some of the minutia. And yes, when it is truly minutia and not important, I get to make a call. Of course, Empowered by the Apocalypse, if you decide to risk doing something that is going to be awesome, then when you roll badly, the game also says, hey, GM, guess what? You can be as biased as you want right now, because the rules of the game are telling you the GM gets to make a decision at this point. They can be totally influenced by your bias. And by the way, it is absolutely the case when I am playing like a Dungeon World game, like if you saw Bob's Birthday Bash, where I take those opportunities where the players roll a 6- to interject my interests, my biases, my thoughts into the game. Because number one, that is what the rules are telling me to do. But number two, that's sort of the yin yang of that situation. The players are the ones setting the pace, because the players are the ones saying what they want to do and whether that will trigger a move or not. I don't get to just make my decision. I don't get just to make something to fuck over the PCs. But if they risk trying to go for something that's going to be really awesome and big, aka making a move, then they understand that the downside of that is that on a 6-, I get to make a move. And that is where I have full reign to add whatever I want to the situation that I think would be most appropriate. So yes, that's where my bias and my arbitration come in, but it's only after the rules gave me permission to do so. It's not just a moment where, the classic example of this, by the way, okay? Let's roll this back. This kind of shows you how backwards some games are versus the way that a Dungeon World game would work. Okay, you're playing 5th edition D&D, or you're playing Pathfinder 2nd edition. Probably more likely 5th edition D&D, because Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the math and the encounter building world rules work out pretty well. You're playing 5th edition D&D, and you threw this encounter at the party, and it's supposed to be this really cool big moment in your game or whatever, and the party's just destroying everything, and they're just kicking ass, and they're just killing everybody. And it's not even going to be a big thing. And you go, man, what I would love is for this story to be exciting and feral, and you know what, I'm just gonna have the doors kick in and have a bunch more orcs join the fight, because that'll be really exciting. Okay, but at that point, you're not only fudging, but you're cheating and you're lying, and I think you're ruining the experience. That being said, when we're playing the idea there is the players are winning, and I want to add in things to make the fight more challenging. If I went into a combat in a Powered by the Apocalypse game and a player rolled a 6-, there's many moves I could make, and one of them is, hint at upcoming danger, or make a threat realized. So if a player rolled a 6- because they decided to take an action in the game, in the conversation that would trigger a move, likely something that is going to happen in a combat because it's a very dangerous, dramatic, exciting environment. They roll a 6-, I could have the doors kick open and have more orcs stream in. By the way, that happens when the players miss, which means they're probably not doing well because they just rolled a very bad roll. Whereas if the party was just crushing it, rolling nothing but 10 pluses, just crushing it the whole fight. Even if I'm sitting there in my chair going like, oh no, I have this idea of this fight being really cool and the doors kicking open and the orcs come streaming in. The game rules are saying, I'm not allowed to do that. You can't do that. Only when the players roll 6- are you allowed to make that kind of hard move, or a golden opportunity. But outside of that, like the rules specifically say when I can be biased and when I can fudge, essentially. They're like, it's like the rules are giving me permission to sort of fudge. And that makes it's like the best of both worlds, because then I get to be this creative force that gets to sort of shape and mold the game. But it's not just done at my all-knowing, omnipotent whim. It's a back and forth. It's a trading of power between the players and the GM. They're not just playing in my domain. No, there is the game world, and sometimes the players have the ball, and sometimes the GM has the ball, and the game rules decide what, who kind of has the ball. When the players roll high, the players have the ball, and what they want to have happen happens. When the players roll low, the GM gets the ball, and they get to make something of that they want to have happen. And then we go back to conversating, and the ball's sort of in the neutral zone until somebody makes a move again, and then we get to make a decision. Who gets to kind of decide the outcome of this dramatic moment? The players or the GM? And I really, really like that. I just find that to be a very rewarding style of game mastering. So Ayla says, good question, Jarek. That's when the GM should ask themselves what with that very question and follow through. Do I think the NPC would really be compelled by this? Checking yourself is super important. You can never be 100% unbiased, but you can use tools to make a good effort. And I appreciate that. But asking myself if I think that my judgment call about the NPC is correct or not, again, feels a lot like we conducted an internal investigation and we found that we did nothing wrong. I'm not saying that, it's great. They have a process. They have a internal investigation process, but it's like, but is that really unbiased? Isn't it just kind of like, if anything, isn't it kind of giving you confirmation bias? Because you're like, I'm going to check my own thoughts. Nope, I was right. And then you're like, see, this is a truly unbiased response. I even checked myself. Maybe you are possessed of stronger mental fortitude than me, but I would have a hard time doing that, to be honest with you. Does dungeon crawling versus open world influence how much control a GM should have or should not have? No, I don't think so. I do not think so. Matthew was talking about sarcasm about pick locks and finds that whole mini game annoying. Yeah. Pick locks. What's the other one? Does disarming traps use the same kind of success accumulation mechanic? Both of those are pretty annoying. Love to hear your thoughts on the trophy books. I know there was a recent community game, but I honestly don't know anything about those games. I don't know if it was a video game or a board game or if it's literally brand new. I don't know anything about it. Dead Meat says, I never found the need to cheat Fudge as a GM, but I will change tactics if things are going badly. For example, attack the guy with the highest AC or use an action that is reasonable but less effective. Dead Meat. That is still fudging. We call it soft fudging, but it is fudging, just to be clear. It is very common. It happens all the time, even amongst the most well-meaning of GMs. I'm pretty good at avoiding it at this point in my career because I'm very cognizant of it, and I've just talked about it a lot. But we call that soft fudge because you're not, like you said, you're not cheating. You're not literally doing something, but like you're like, well, the wizard's like at 10 hit points, and this monster could totally just go over there and finish the wizard off. But instead, I'm going to go attack the champion with the shield raised, and who has a shield block feat and a major sturdy shield. Because it's like, yeah, you're not cheating, but you really are kind of trying to control the narrative. You're trying to control what will be. Creative Role Playing says, if I ever fudge a dice roll, it is to benefit the players or the story. We could do a whole video on fudging, but I don't believe that there's ever really a time where that should be necessary, unless if you feel that it's necessary to fudge a die roll and you called for the die roll, then you're playing the wrong game system. Because if that game system produces outcomes that you find so unpalatable that you need to lie and cheat about them, that's fine if that's the way you want to run your game. But then why are you playing that game engine? That's the only thing I have a problem with. Yeah. I mean, 2D20 uses the concept of the GM pool, but either way, right? It's shackles. It's the Magna Carta on the GM's omnipotent power, right? They are no longer the unassailable monarch that has infinite, powers and resources. In Mutants and Masterminds, a GM can fudge, they can cheat, but they have to tell the players they're doing so and why they're doing so, and then give them this hero point, which will allow them to be 10 times more kick-ass at a dramatic moment to their choosing later. It's about sharing the power and not just hoarding it. Yes, Stephen, a very good point. I mean, in my personal opinion, player agency sometimes means, getting your shit pushed in, and player agency means, facing the consequences of your bad or just unfortunate actions. I mean, we're playing a game, and most of us are playing a game with a 20-sided die as determining the outcome. And there's a lot of variance in a D20 that you don't get in other game systems. I mean, obviously, it could, the standard deviation on a 2D20 or a D20 is pretty high. So you're going to get pretty wild outcomes. Now, Dan brings up an interesting point. What is the difference between determining the number of orcs they fight before the combat and determining the number of orcs they fight during the combat? Well, in old school D&D, Dan, we would just randomly roll how many orcs there were. So actually, I'm not determining how many orcs there are at all. It's just randomly determined. Nowadays, you don't do that, because how would you possibly get a balanced or fair fight if you do that? And, my counterpart to that is, maybe the fight doesn't need to be balanced or fair. Well, Ayla, I believe you, by the way. I actually do believe you, but I think you have a much better, internal monologue, I guess, than maybe I do. I mean, that's good. I mean, that's nice if you have that ability to check yourself. Um, Sean says, I like to roll dice on who a monster attacks. I have used that. The last time we played Abomination Vaults, I did that. I do that all the time, Sean. And I roll it out in the front of the table. I'll go, and by the way, this is where the GM bias can enter in, because this isn't even a mechanic in Pathfinder fucking 2. But I'll our Abomination Vaults game has only 3 people. It has Aaron, who is playing a sorcerer. It has Bob, who is playing, he was playing a barbarian, but his barbarian died. So now he's going to play a fighter. And then we have our buddy George, who is playing a rogue. Pretty sweet party, actually. Once they get the fighter. It'll be a fighter, a sorcerer, a rogue. Holy shit. But the rogue is an archetype cleric. And I think I think everybody has like treat wounds or something like that. And battlefield medicine. That's how they kind of handle healing. Obviously, lacking heal is kind of a rough beat. Anyways, I will be like, I'll take a die out, like a D4 or something, or a D6, and be like, okay, I'm going to be attacking. Bob, you just crit. So the creature's going to go attack you on a 1, 2, or 3. But on a 4 or 5, it's going to go attack the wizard, and a 6, it's going to attack the rogue because you're on the other side of the battlefield. And I'll just roll it, and I announce what the numbers mean, and the players sort of weigh in, be like, hey, I did something last round. Shouldn't it be more attack? Shouldn't it be more likely to attack me? And I'll go, oh, that's a good point. And then I'll modify the percent chance. But the point is, we're doing this sort of negotiation about odds. And then once we're all in agreement, we let the dice decide. And I've done that. I just did that like literally the last time we played Pathfinder 2nd Edition. But in general, I've been doing that my entire career. GM Scott says, in the 4E game last night, Darth Gorlock surrounded my wizard with a few enemies. They flanked me for combat advantage. They even attacked me and did damage. How dare he? It's funny that you say that, because I know that you're a staff of defense wizard. My buddy, when we played our first 4th edition campaign, the one that went all the way to 30th level, that was like really big deal. Our wizard was an Eladrin, not a human, GM Scott. I think you're a human. But he was an Eladrin wizard, staff of defense. And he took it as like a personal affront. He would like almost get mad if he took damage, if he had to spend a healing surge in the course of a session. He took pretty much every defensive power that existed in the game. And as an Eladrin, he also had the ability eventually to get like defensive, reactive teleports, in addition to all the staff of defense abilities. And he was so difficult to hit. And there was sort of a recurring inside joke, which is, the joke is like, but before you do that, because I would always describe how I was going to go attack him or do something horrible to his character. And he would always come up and be like, but before you do that, I teleport away 5 squares and turn invisible, but before you do that, a flaring shield appears around me and I gain +5 to my AC. It was always just like some massive defensive buff that would just pop out of nowhere. So anyways. Let's see here. I'm trying to see. Sorry if I missed some comments here. Let's see. Dan says, I don't think it's fudging if there were never rules for it in the first place. There are no rules for when and how to introduce drama to trade games. So you just make them up as you go. There's some truth to that. Again, it's like I said, if the rules don't cover a situation or a mechanic, that's kind of their way of saying it's up to you, GM. You should make whatever call you feel is the most appropriate. So there's some kind of truth to that. So yeah, that is a, you are caring about things the game doesn't care about. Right. And that's where, that's a fine space to live and work in, but it's like, if you care too much about those things and the game doesn't care about them at all, maybe you're playing the wrong game. KC says, yeah, I think that's why it's just better to let the dice decide. I couldn't possibly know if an 800-year-old elf would be convinced by the concerns of a short-lived human. And I think that is, I think that's awesome. Also, I think it's fun. I think it's cool. I don't know. Again, everybody's thoughts and opinions are different, but I don't play role-playing games to play like debate club. I don't play role-playing games to like hear people's crazy, weird bullshit explanation of how they're gonna never be ambushed because they did all the right things, and how they're building their ghillie suit and how it would work completely. And there's no chance that anyone would ever spot their camp because I was in, Boy Scouts for 10 years and I know how to do this. And I'm like, dude, let's just roll a die. That's cool. Shadram says, open dice rolls all the way. Although I am realizing that I protect some of my NPCs a bit too much by just keeping them out of encounters or other risks. I mean, yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of the Dungeon World principle, but let me look it up for you, Shadram. What is it? Keep them in the cross height. Put the characters into the crosshairs or something like that. Damn it, what is it? Maybe it's from Apocalypse World. I'm looking it up. Here we go. Oh, there we go. Look through crosshairs. That's one of the principles of Powered by the Apocalypse, of Apocalypse World. And the idea being that, like, when you're the GM and you're playing an exciting, dangerous game, always consider, and I'll quote Vincent Baker here from Powered by the Apocalypse. Look through crosshairs. Always consider killing your NPCs, burning down the town, blowing up the throne room. Avoid sacred NPCs who always get away without a scratch. Do not worry about the status quo. Be eager to allow big changes to happen to the campaign and its fiction. Just because you are playing a module, don't be afraid to let player character actions trump what's written in the book. If they kill the cult leader before the proper boss fight at the time it's supposed to happen, then that's what happens, and fucking just go with it. It's crazy. It's scary, but it's better. It's definitely more it's taking the biggest and best advantage of you being a human game master, which is huge. Shadram also super chatted. Thank you, Shadram. Just doing my bit to support this kind of discussion topic. It's why I joined KOLC and has made me a much better GM. Well, thank you very much for that support, Shadram. Appreciate it. All the way from New Zealand. Love it. Glad to hear that you find that you're becoming a better GM. All right. Let's see, Dan. I don't know if Dan is saying I'm being hypocritical. Changing tactics is cheating, but adding more orcs is not. Well, no, adding more orcs is cheating. Changing tactics is cheating. They're both technically cheating. They're fudging to a certain extent. Open rolls all the time, says Ken and Sean. I agree. Random, but somebody is still picking the enemy number and kind of dice. Yes, Zach. I look, we can't help ourselves there. There is going to be some amount of bias that is going to creep its way in. You are absolutely correct. But it is our duty, or at least my attempt, to try to eliminate as much of it as possible. See, Mindless Undead are a great roll to see who they attack. GM Scott says initial attacks for Mindless Undead will be determined by a random die roll, but after the fight starts, it's as simple as who's currently the closest. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of that kind of behavior as well. Ayla says, rolling to see who a monster attacks is something I do too. I do this when I find myself thinking about what their logical course of action would be. These are situations where I'm okay ceding control. All right, cool. Oh, yeah, so this is apparently something that a lot of people do, which is great. I mean, I think it's fun. I think it's exciting, right? I mean, I've said this before, role-playing games in some ways are just kind of like, it's like reading a book and going to a casino at the same time. And except you can't lose any of your money. I mean, sometimes, this hobby ain't cheap for some of us. But rolling dice is fun, taking a chance, making a gamble. And so I think anytime you can add that stuff to the game, I think it becomes more fun. Git is here. He says sharing control is a good point, and it probably varies on game system and table. How much percentage of control do the following entities have in a game? The GM, the players, the characters, the dice, the story, etc. Yeah, that's a great way to think about it, actually. I really do agree with that. And I guess what I would say to the point about ceding control or sharing control is, as the GM, I find that I get better outcomes and I enjoy it better when I am sharing more, like when that percentage of control that is in the GM spot has gone down and we have given out more of that control to the dice, the players, the characters, etc. I find that for me, that is a better outcome. I'm a human. No teleporting for me. The free feats and at wills were too tempting. Getting the wizard at wills are very strong, and getting a third at will as a low level wizard is pretty sweet. I agree. Dan says it's only cheating if the players didn't agree to you engaging in those sort of behaviors. If they agree, then you're all playing the same game with the same rules. You know, there's an interesting philosophical question there where, like, I mean, I guess it comes down to this. Are you telling them before the game, maybe during your session 0, hey, I am going to fudge dice rolls, combats, scenarios to make the game that I personally think is going to be the best outcome. And everyone goes, yeah, that sounds great. I mean, in that case, mazel tov, go for it. I mean, that sounds awesome. My experience is that very few people do that though. So, but maybe Dan, maybe you get it. Maybe get it right. Sean says my biggest, maybe only hurdle when GMing a very improv game in a system like Pathfinder 2nd Edition, 4th Edition, 13th Age is encounters that pop up that I never prep for, and creating an encounter can take a bit of time prep. Sean, you just listed the single biggest complaint I have with those 3 games. I love 4th Edition D&D. I love Pathfinder 2nd Edition. 13th Age is incredible, amazing experience. But those games have enough, and look, there's no free lunches. Those Pathfinder games, 4th Edition games, they have rich, rewarding, tactical combat with exciting interplay between resources and abilities and character actions. But that comes at a cost, which is if you want the encounter to not be anything more than just a boring, snooze fest and just people just beating each other, you got to put some time, thought, and attention and care into the creation of that encounter. I don't think enough people in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, including the authors of various APs, put enough thought and care and consideration into the battlefield itself. I think there should be more terrain. I'm talking a lot more terrain. I'm talking hindering terrain, difficult terrain, hazardous terrain, blocking terrain. These are 4th Edition terms. Because I think that makes for a better experience. But those are hard to do when you're playing on the fly. Which is why, Sean, my go-to, and in fact, all 3 of those games that you listed, Sean, PF2, 4E, and 13th Age, all are derivatives of Dungeons & Dragons, which was a dungeon game. And Dungeons solved this issue by allowing the players freedom to go anywhere they want, but they can only go where there are rooms. And those rooms you will have prepped in advance. And so you get to have your cake and eat it too, which is why Dungeons & Dragons worked, which is why we're still playing it 50 years later, even if we've sort of lost the message along the way. PF2 says, you have the Boy Girl Scout background. You get a +1 circumstance bonus to incredibly niche stuff that might come up sometime. Like it'll say you get a +1 circumstance bonus to survival rolls in order to make camp. And you're like, wait, I didn't even know there was a roll that was required to make camp. Does that mean we have to roll now because we have to make camp? Well, it's like, yeah, well, because you get the +1 bonus, we have to roll now. If you didn't have that background, you wouldn't have to roll at all. I would just totally hand wave it and say, yeah, whatever, you make camp, you start a fire, it's all good. Let's see. If the cult leader gets killed too early, his lieutenant swears revenge on the PCs, and he may be even a tougher fight. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think you take it in a feral direction. I think that's what it comes down to. And, this is where oracles, aka random tables, could be really fun as well. And you can just sort of, when you're stuck, you just roll something and go, wow, I would have never thought of that. Just like that English teacher's prompt, this is going to push me into a new direction, someplace I would have never gone on my own. I think we're almost caught up here. I downed a PC crossing a fallen log across a river. They fell prone, of course, and I gave them the chance to roll a D100 minus a D100. 50 or lower means they fall in. They said, F you, I'm not rolling that. I guess player agency only goes so far. Well, fair enough. Ayla says, I agree. If players are okay with you fudging and they know you're fudging, then cool. But I also don't know many players who would be like, yeah, that sounds great. Right. We're going to talk about Amber. We're going to talk about Everway. Okay. Which is another game that was diceless. There are game systems that don't have dice, and the GM literally just gets to decide. So if that's the kind of gameplay system, that why wouldn't you use that? I just don't get it. I don't understand it. And we all know the answer, because that's not as satisfying to most people as a player to know that the GM just decided. They want the illusion that a dice roll was made and there was a chance and it was going to be really, do or die. But the fact of the matter is there was never really any chance. So you were going to fail, but you don't get that kind of dramatic tension with just a decision. You get that with a die roll. Sean says, I'd much rather be playing a co-op Ironsworn game. I liked Ironsworn, but I don't know if that I would play it as a co-op again. We've been playing Ironsworn. We play Starforge, which is a sci-fi version, but there was something off there. I think as a journaling game, I'm sure it works fine, but which is ultimately what it was really designed for. But 13th Age is where I'm at now. I mean, there's nothing wrong with 13th Age, to be clear. I think if most players were in like a do or die moment, and the party was down to their last couple of HPs, and the boss came, and the big bad evil guy came and charged forward and crossed blades, and the GM rolled and was like, oh no, like he misses and whatever, and then the players get to go one last time, and then they roll and he goes, oh, you hit him, and and he's dead, and everyone's like cheering, and the GM goes, just so you know, actually, I rolled a crit on you that last attack, so you probably would have been dead. And then the damage you did, he actually had like 35 more hit points. But, you guys were pretty beat up, so I just decided that was appropriate time for him dying. I'm going to guess that 99% of players would immediately just like, the elation of beating the big bad evil guy would just immediately turn to disappointment and sourness if something like that happened. Casey, I think you make a great point here, kind of an off topic, but yeah, I agree with you. I mean, sometimes if like the players are going to go off the beaten path, then you go like, look, you guys are going to have to deal with some loading screens. I'm not a computer. I can't just spit this shit out instantaneous. You have the freedom to go and do wherever you want, and I'm okay with that. Just be aware that we might not get as much gameplay done because it is going to take me, 15 minutes to put something together that actually makes sense. So I think that's actually a good point to be made, Casey. Creative says, if I recall correctly, Everway used fantasy art cards to help decide the plot. Interesting concept. It did. Creative role playing. That is actually Everway had 3 methods of determining outcome. There was fortune, karma, fortune, and fate. I can't remember one of them, but one of them was a deck of cards. Yeah, with art on them. They were kind of tarot-esque, for sure. Ryan says the Ironsworn Starforge book should probably explain difficulties a bit better. I think if you read it as there's a tendency to make the quest encounters require too much progress. Ryan, absolutely, and that is also absolutely what we did. To be fair, open roles are the best. Builds tension and feels fair. I mean, the problem, Steven, with people having fudging and having victories and losses is the problem is like we're playing game systems where losses typically mean that the characters are dead or that there's they've lost their PC and these characters require a lot of work and investment, and nobody really wants that. The players don't want that. The GM doesn't want that. So then it's like, okay, so if character death is a pain in the ass and we all don't like it, then why are we playing a game where character death is on the table? And they're like, because everyone's like, because we like it. We like the feats and we like the monsters and we like leveling up. And it's like, okay, so we'll play the game and then we'll just fudge whenever we get close to death, because that way, or we'll create a game system that allows you to auto stabilize by spending your hero points, or resets your death saving throws whenever you come back up to positive hit points, and basically make it as hard as possible inside the game system for you to die. But that just kind of punts the problem, because the fact of the matter is there's still a shitload of variants in D20 games, and even in 5th edition or Pathfinder 2nd edition, you are going to die sometimes. So then you have this unwanted outcome. Then why, we should probably come up with a game or change the mechanics, I suppose, to get rid of that, if that's not something you're willing to accept. If you are willing to accept death and everyone's okay with that, then yeah, kill PCs and move on. But if you're going to get to the point where you're like, I have to fudge because otherwise someone will die, then don't let death be something that was even an option in your encounters to begin with. Yes, losses are too severe in these systems. I find that 13th Age is a lot faster than Pathfinder 2nd Edition for no other reason, GM Scott, than 13th Age is kind of pseudo ranges, theater of the mind. And I think that's definitely the case. That makes it easier. Ayla with $5 super chat says, I've enjoyed the spirited back and forth here and on the Discord about this particular topic. Do you think it's safe to say that GM control is system dependent? Yes, I think that is safe to say. I think there are some systems that are, obviously every game system has different responsibilities that the rules cover versus what the rules do not cover. If you go back to old school D&D, there were no skill systems. There was no feats, there was nothing. You had 6 abilities. We have this modern concept of making an ability score check. Technically, that didn't even really exist in 1st edition D&D. Strength had bend bars, lift gates. You had your open door roll, but everything else was basically just about like combat and maybe tracking torches and falling down pits. Kind of everything else is sort of in the purview of the GM. Modern day games tend to have much more robust rule sets, which really cover pretty much every set of circumstances. In fact, people claim one of the complaints about 5th edition is that's like, it doesn't have a rule for everything. Come play Pathfinder 2nd edition. It has a rule for everything. And it's like, that is a selling point. In fact, again, I like the game. Obviously, we play it. We've been playing Abomination Vaults and having a great time with it. I will say, this is funny, there are so many rules in Pathfinder 2nd edition that I feel like, it's like weird, paradoxically, I feel like I have no control over anything, but because I have too much control, because the rules are everywhere and the game doesn't even need me to make a decision. Because for all this talk tonight about control, I don't want it to be none. I like there to be a back and forth, but when there's a rule for everything, then there's a feat, and there might be an entire class archetype that is built around this one set of rules. What's the one that we were looking at that one time? It's like the snare maker or something, right? Like there's an entire system for building snares, and you have to have the right feats, and they got to be a fucking formula for them. So it's like, there's no world that like this game cares about that. They put in all these mechanics for that. And yes, of course, you could just ignore all that, and you could just ignore all that. You could just ignore all that. You could just ignore all that. But it's like, now I'm having to do the mental math of figuring out what gets ignored, what doesn't get ignored, what feats and skills and powers and abilities and actions do I need to tell my players, don't bother taking that. I'll just make a call. And then it's like, so then what the value of the rule set becomes less and less and less and less and less, to a point where I feel like I'm frustrated. What am I doing here? But thank you for the super chat. RPG Musing says, the fact that I don't fudge ever is something I disclose during session 0. The dice fall where they will, and we adjudicate that. If I don't want to accept the dice rolls, then I don't ask for a roll. That is brilliant. That is very good. I will just take that one step further, RPG Musings. That is where Powered by the Apocalypse can be very scary and freeing. And I say Powered by the Apocalypse, I just mean like that particular type of game. Because Powered by the Apocalypse says, yeah, I know what your group wants. You want this to not be a roll. All of you are just like, this moment would be so cool if it just happened. And none of you are willing to accept the result of a failure. But guess what? You don't get a chance. You have to roll. And that is scary, but it's also why I think you get these really unique and powerful moments in those games. I'm a little delayed. Derek answered my question before I asked it, but I didn't see the answer until after I asked it. Nice. Thanks, kid. Yeah. So do I think the existence of PC death motivates GMs to fudge more often? Yes. Absolutely. 100%. I think it's the number one reason why GMs fudge. I think the second reason is because the fight wasn't cool or epic enough. They had this big, bad, evil guy, final boss mechanic idea in their mind, and the players just embarrassed it. Trad games have no real player agency. The GM determines the fiction, the saving throws, the number of orcs, and the power, what tables to roll for random encounters. The GM determines degree of player controls. But PbtA games explicitly give narrative control to players. Yes, I'm all on board with you for that, Dan. I agree with you. Because, PbtA games the GM doesn't set a DC. It's always just 7 or higher, 10 or higher. And when you get a 10 or higher, the rules of the game say, you get this thing. You get it. The GM can't weasel you out of it. Like, you get it. And I really appreciate that. On balance, I like Pathfinder 2nd edition more than 5th edition. But I've had fun times playing all the 5th edition games I had. And part of the reason I enjoyed playing my 5th edition games is because I knew the game was wonky and all over the place, and I just threw shit together and didn't even care. Like I said, I threw 30 ghouls at like a level 2 party. I sold to a level 1 or 2 party that was going through the Sunless Citadel. I sold them a greater arrow of slaying for like 35 gold, because it was like most of their gold, and obviously very cool and powerful. And then they used that greater arrow of slaying to kill a troll. And it was awesome. And they remember that moment for the rest of their lives. And Bob still talks about it. True. Yes. Yeah, skill systems came in pretty quick. I know D&D, like you said, was late until 3rd edition, really. But, a lot of those other games, kind of in the second wave of role-playing games, the Roll Masters, Star Frontiers, definitely started to have those for sure. Yeah, mixed results are tough. Success with complication can mean a lot of things. I mean, a great example of this, which gets brought up a lot, mostly because I think it's just because, being, a little shit, but there's a great example that comes up a lot of times of we were playing Scum and Villainy, which is a Forge in the Dark game, but it's a sci-fi game. And the group was landing on a planet. They were trying to infiltrate. There was a government-controlled secret base. They had to steal something from the base and get out. Ice planet, Hoth, massive ice storms in the atmosphere. And so I felt like it was a dramatic enough moment that I called for a pilot check. And if they wanted to land, on the planet and avoid detection, the pilot check sort of represented all of that. And the pilot, played by Tim, got a 4 or 5, which in Bellies in the Dark means a success with a complication, which, very clearly stated, it's a minor consequence or it's a minor problem. And so my ruling was that they were able to navigate through the storm and land without being detected. But when they landed the ship, they had to do so at, great speed. They were kind of falling quickly to avoid the storm wind shear and the detection screens. And when they landed, it damaged some of the landing gear. And while they were totally fine, no one took any damage. Currently, the ship, was damaged. And I remember that, and Aaron still brings it up, that, he felt like that was very inappropriate because he felt like that complication robbed him of the success. Aaron wasn't the pilot. Tim was the pilot, but Aaron was on the ship. And it brings, and Darth Gorlock and I have talked about this a lot too, which is like, I think success with complications is probably one of the hardest things to do well, because I think it does mean a lot of different things to a lot of different players. Anyways, just an anecdote about how that can go wrong. Like, we didn't fight about it. It didn't go off everyone just sort of accepted it and moved on, but everyone's like, so we didn't get what we wanted. And it's like, well, what did you want? And they're like, well, I wanted to land perfectly without any issues and avoid all detection and avoid any damage to the ship and avoid any damage to us and get everything we wanted. And I rolled a success. So if you're not giving me everything that I want, then you're technically taking my success away from me. And it's kind of like one of those weird spots. I will admit to that. 100% I could DM 5e and do whatever, tell my players to get fucked, and we'd still probably have fun. That's fantastic. Ryan knew it was the landing story. Yes, exactly. You knew it. You knew it, buddy. You knew it. Dan says, can you create a fictional situation that might pop up in a game and run through how you envision a PbtA game versus a trad game would run it? Through the lens of GM agency. Yeah, sure. I mean, the simplest example would be, a group is trying to sneak their way into a castle for a, holiday party event or something. Maybe they need to go in there and assassinate somebody or something. So they're trying to sneak in through the back, and it's guarded, but they said, oh, we'll just lie and pretend like we're servants or something. And the GM says, okay. And in a traditional game, you would say, okay, make a bluff check. Now, you have a bias here, right? Like, you want them to succeed, but the game rules are going to come in and say, well, you need to make this bluff check. And you're like, well, I could just have them talk to the guards and listen to them, but I'm like, I'm going to roll the dice. But the problem with the rolling the dice is they'll either succeed and the guards will believe them and they'll move in. Although it's not entirely sure whether they would let them in or not, because bluff doesn't really describe whether the NPC will agree to your terms, does it? It's more of like, are they able to detect that you're lying? That doesn't necessarily mean that you still convince them. So it's kind of like a whole little separate conversation there. You could argue that maybe it ends up becoming like a weird make an impression / request, but then you have to throw in a bluff in the middle of it. But anyways, long story short, you're going to end up with two outcomes. Either they succeed and you go, okay, you get in, or they fail. And then the guards go, well, we know you're lying. And now you have this whole other type situation where the group might get, arrested, or there suddenly has a big fight. And so, the end result of that is you have two very highly variable different outcomes, but one feels like the players got away with everything and it wasn't really that interesting. And on the other one, they got nothing. They accomplished nothing. They just completely failed. And now like the story has gone in a completely different direction, which is probably okay, but it feels like it's not as appropriate because maybe that was a good idea. And how do you reflect that? The failure condition of bluff in a trad game doesn't really give any credence to whether it was a quote unquote good idea or not. But in a PbtA game, clearly there's always a chance that they could roll really well, but the game tries to hard that. I mean, 10 higher is hard on 2d6. Let's be clear. And getting high ability scores are very rare. I mean, 10 pluses are fairly rare in a PbtA game. And by reason, if the players just roll nonstop 10 pluses, it's probably time to end your game because your campaign, because the game loses a lot of its teeth. The fact of the matter is most of the time the game has agenda. The game has a bias. They want the players to make forward progress. They want the players to succeed. That's why the game rules are 7 or higher, and you have positive bonuses to it. So, you might only need a 6 or higher or 5 or higher on the 2d6 roll, but it's success with a complication, right? The guards let you in, but someone's following you. The guards let you in, but they're going to escort you. The guards let you in, but, they tell their superior about, you know what I mean? Like we move forward, but we introduce complications. So the players get to feel like badasses and, have this success, but there's still this interesting moment. A lot of times in D20 games, success is like the most boring thing. And then of course, on the other side of the thing, with a PbtA game, you could roll a 6-, and that's a failure. But unlike in a D20 trad game, where failure means failure in Powered by the Apocalypse game means the GM makes as hard of a move as they would like. And that could be anything. That could even be the guards believe you, if the GM wanted it to be, but introduce some other form of complication. It could even be it could even be like quantum, right? Like the guards, you spend a while convincing the guards. It takes a long time, but finally they accept your cover story and you move into the thing. And it's like, oh, well, where's the GM move? And he's like, and as you enter the hall, disguised as servants, you see talking to your target, Count Pierre, who definitely knows who you are. He wasn't here before, but he's here now because you rolled a 6-. It's like, I feel like that. Now, if I just did that normally in a D&D trad game, I would feel like I was cheating. But in a PbtA game, I feel like that's fair game because I get to make as hard of a move as I want. So I just think that it generates these more interesting and exciting outcomes than we would ever get from anything else. And of course, I think that also keeps the forward momentum of the story going as well. But to be fair, those games are more concerned. They have a discrete agenda. Powered by the Apocalypse type games are very specifically looking to, make the characters' lives not boring, play to find out what happens, make the PCs feel like the protagonist badasses that they are. It's designed to sort of promote that, and the mechanics reflect that. GM Scott says, you talked about enjoying 5e and PF2. It's my experience that the person running the game and the players contribute far more. Yes, I mean, I'd rather play the worst game in the world with the best people than the best game in the world with the worst people, or even moderately okay people. Sorry, Ayla. Save Versus, getting us over the line. Thank you for your support. Appreciate that super chat. That is very, very kind of you. Save Versus came in and said, I've had PCs roll and describe what happens after. I've told them that what the outcomes are before the roll, and I've let their description happen without a roll. Just depends on what serves the story. Yeah, but I'm telling you, that story, it's gonna feel tame, I think, because at the end of the day, what serves the story is a decision that you're making. You're deciding that you know best and that your belief is superior to the sort of collective will of the universe. And I'm sure it works great. I'm sure that, you're a competent game master who runs a really great game. But, and this isn't about saying you're doing it wrong. It's about understanding that when you change, when you have that much control and you're making these decisions about when and where and why the rules apply, you're doing so with a agenda that is going to be inherently biased by you, and it's going to tend to seek safe outcomes or consensus. And I have found that some of my best moments in gaming have come from when I was not in control. But I appreciate, I think we all do this to a certain extent. And even I do this at times. I'm not like some robot who always, does 100% of everything I say, but I try to, be as kind of removed from the decision-making as possible. RPG Music says, it is one of the things that makes PbtA games interesting because success with complication is often felt as worse than just failure. That is true. That's the human side. That I have experienced that as well. RPG Musings. I really have. Good games push against the natural inclinations of the GM. I think that's also true. I think that is also true. That's a good point. I tell the players before the roll the outcomes will be. Then they roll, and then they tell me how that result happens. Sometimes we all contribute, but the story is after the roll. That is probably my preferred, ideal way to sort of handle dice rolls in a game. Because that way it's a conscious decision. I never make a player, and after, by the way, after I state the consequences to the roll, I try to give situations where the players can then say, I don't want to take that bet. I don't want to take that roll. I'm right with Ron. These are I actually enjoy sometimes these meta conversations more than I enjoy in some ways. They mean more to me and my enjoyment of the game and my understanding of the game than the actual, what is actually happening in the game. If you'll probably see this when we start to play Root, assuming, we can push back the cameras and push back the big monitor with chat and, all the OBS and all the sound shit and try to just push all that out and just really get to this core experience. I think you're going to see that for me, this happens all the time in our Legend of the Five Rings game, where it's there's a scene happening and it's whoa, stop. We need to think about it. This is why your character didn't trust me. And it's oh yeah, you're totally right. What if what's happening right now is actually because of something that you did? And it's oh man, that would be, and it's almost like this sidebar that is occurring, and I love those conversations. The meta conversation about the game is, something is better for me than the game itself. This is literally just a bribe for orange lights. All right, boom. There we go. We're in the KOLC orange now. I'm not above the swatch. Yes. LM Gaming. Oh, sorry, LM. I like to make them roll without telling them the DCs that they have to hit. Then, based on the roll, I will tell them what happens. LM Gaming. Why not tell them the DC? I'm curious. And why not tell them ahead of time what success and failure mean? I'm just curious why you like to do that. A lot of people agreeing with Ryan here. GM Scott says, I have even started adding in possession effect conversations before their rolls, and I'm running 13th age. I mean, GM Scott, I love position and effect. It is by far, it's the reason why Blades in the Dark might be my favorite system to run, because I think it is such a fantastic way for us all to be on the same page and to speak in both, I think the term that someone made was narrow mechanical. Like it's narrative and it's mechanical. Like when I say a situation is desperate, that means something in the fiction, but it also means something in the mechanics of the game. And that is why I love it. I love it because we're all on the same page and we all understand, like, there's no ambiguity, like there's no confusion. Now the dice rolls are still going to ultimately kind of determine what happens. Ben, of course, Ben coined it. Narrow mechanical. Oh, I thought it was like narrow mechanical, like narrow mechanical, something like that. But like that's how I would have said it, narrow mechanical. But anyways, whatever. You're just throwing it out there. Okay. Zach is team orange. I don't know how orange I can make orange before it like starts to cause problems. The classic example of ignoring rolling dice is that you want to persuade the guards. What do you say? And go off of what they say. Right. But the question say versus is, why are you ignoring the dice roll there? Why not roll? What are you afraid of happening? LM Gaming says, well, they will tell me what they want to happen, and based on their role, I will bend it or say that it happens. I also like the mystery aspects so they don't pick and choose which PCs make the roll. Well, LM Gaming, I got to tell you, you and I just do not we just do not agree. I find that I think your games are better served when the players actually are pretty informed, that they have a lot of agency. And you'll hear me talk about this a lot on this channel, which is in order to have player agency, which is, I think, ultimately what players want out of these games. They want to feel like they are in control. They need to be able to make decisions that matter, and they have to be well informed about what those decisions are. What are the what is to be gained? What is to be lost? What are the consequences of that action should they fail? What are the perks if they should succeed? Because that's what people, I think you'll find that people will respond to that and feel empowered as players, as people, as human beings. Because at the end of the day, like, fuck their characters, right? I mean, like we're playing the games with people, and we're doing it, taking even one big step back. We are playing these games to create an experience that we can all sort of, collaboratively enjoy. So now that should never be a game's exact goal, because then you get into like a weird, well, the number one goal is fun. And it's like, okay, that's not really a goal. Like, it's a game. All games should be fun. We shouldn't play games that aren't fun. Like, that's kind of a cop out. So yeah, I mean, I give it a try, maybe just think of, like, see how they respond, see how you feel, like, and know what Ellen gave me? Maybe roll that die out in front of a screen or publicly. Like, you're going to have this like knee-jerk, heart-wrenching moment, because you're going to suddenly realize, wow, anything could happen right now in this moment. And it's going to feel a little weird. It's going to feel like you're out of control. But what you're going to find is that the players are going to respond to that much more strongly than anything that has ever happened in your previous games, I think. I mean, in my experience. But, try it. See what works for you and your group, for sure. I mean, my general statement is the only time I think that GMs should fudge a roll is if they like fucked up. Like, and even then I usually like, mea culpa and admit it, like, hey guys, I gave this creature way too many hit points. It is way too tough. I'm just going to say that last hit killed it. This thing should never have lived this long. I gave it way too many hit points. I don't know what I was thinking. But we're all good. But I would never, I try not to I try not to keep it on the down low, you know? Listen, that was player driven. I didn't come up with any of those goals. My players have the ability in an intrigue to set, each one gets to set and add a character, gets to add a goal to the intrigue of what might be accomplished. What they chose to add, that is outside of my control. I don't get to decide that. Keith, this conversation is a good thought exercise. I'm a new GM, and this is making me think deeper about these scenarios. Yeah, Keith, I mean, at the end of the day, that is what this is all about. That's what our Patreon is about. If you're interested in having these kind of, again, this whole conversation came out of a very elaborate, in-depth conversation that Ayla and I had last week, along with some other folks. And that is part of our Patreon. That's part of our Discord. That is a perk of being a part of our Patreon. And it's really about challenging people's assumptions. It's about challenging my own assumptions. I've learned so much from my own community that it's wild. I've learned to look at games and appreciate games. I mean, this is how big of a difference it is. Like, I could see a world now where I might enjoy running or playing Call of Cthulhu. And I never thought I would do that in a million years, but seeing all these people in my community, people who I respect, be like, oh, I just played Call of Cthulhu and it was so awesome. Oh, we're playing a Call of Cthulhu game and it seems great. I'm like, it's starting to affect me a little bit, you know? So anyways, yes, definitely appreciate the kind words. And again, if you're interested in kind of doing this all the time, maybe check out our Patreon. There's a link in the description below. You can also head over to patreon.com/Knights of the Last Call. And while you're looking, good time to subscribe, ring the bell so that you're notified every time we're about to go live. When we drop videos, which we haven't done much in the last year, we've mostly focused on live streams, but we're hoping, at least as the year goes on, to start doing more sort of short form videos, not 5 minutes, but 20, 25, 30-minute videos, just so we can get more content out there. In addition to our Tuesdays and Thursday live streams, and sometimes we do a bonus Friday or a Monday or a Sunday. We've done a Saturday bonus stream. So if you're subscribed and click the bell, you'll be able to get that notification. Well, yes, the NPC did have the goal of personal relations. Yes. Well, so specifically, the NPC's goal was to seduce Hachi because she wanted to use the sexual relationship that she had previously had with him as leverage in order to create an environment that would benefit her politically. That is specifically. She wasn't obsessed with him or in love with him. She was just using him. In Fantasy Flight games, do you read the dice or do you let the players interpret the dice? Not quite sure what you mean. I mean, I roll my dice out in front. But I mean, yeah, I let my players interpret the dice. I haven't really played modern Genesis, so I don't know 100% what's going on there. I haven't played Edge of the Empire. The only time I ever played was Warhammer Fantasy 3rd edition, which was kind of I think the first time they started using all those. All these crazy weird dice and all their crazy weird symbols. It was fun though. I think that I would I think the collaborative experience of that is way better. I mean, when we play Legend of the Five Rings, which is a much more condensed version of what they do in Genesis, someone will roll it, they'll have some successes and opportunities, and other people will join in. They'll say oh, well, you could spend that opportunity to do this, or then I'll be or what if you spend those two opportunities to gain some sort of insight, and they'll be oh, that'd be cool, but I really want to do this. So it's a back and forth, It's just like the devil's bargain in Forged in the Dark games, A player could suggest it, the GM could suggest it, another different player could suggest it, but ultimately it's the player's kind of decision about whether they want to take the devil's bargain or not. But, sometimes the player might say, hey, I've got an idea, or sometimes they might say, does anybody have a cool idea for a devil's bargain? And sometimes they might not even be thinking about a devil's bargain, but you as another player, different player at the table think, oh, it would be so cool. What about this as a devil's bargain? And the person might go, oh, dude, that's so cool. We should do that. Or they might say, no, I'm okay. That's fine. I'm good on that. And it's like, okay, that's the decision. Really? They don't sell the dice? They don't sell the Genesis dice? Really? Wow, that's crazy. I'm sure there's got to be a million of them out there, though, right? Anyways. Always sold out. Okay. Well. Damn. You were hoarding them. You bought them early when the buying was good. All right. It's 9:30, so we are going to wrap this up. I thought this was only going to be like an hour and a half stream today, but you all kept it interesting. You kept it fun. Thank you again for the support on the super chats. Appreciate reaching that goal. Still going to keep hammering away at this tip goal so that I can buy us some flights so that we don't have to drive four to 5 days to San Diego and then, 3 to 4 days back. Longer there because I figure we're going to be stopping along the way, meeting with patrons and, all that other stuff. Good timing, Rule of Cool. Well, I think, if you go back and you watch the VOD, I think you'll enjoy it. I think it was a good conversation. And again, let me know in the comments if you're watching this later. What are your thoughts? How much control do you think GM should have? Do you feel like your authority as a game master is compromised when, the rules basically tell you what you can and can't do? Do you feel like you are capable of being unbiased and still making feral decisions? Do you have the kind of self-control that I apparently lack? Let me know. Or hop over onto our Patreon and join our Discord. Let me know. We can chat about it in KOLC content chat. You never got an answer on my comments. Real cool. Did you make a comment? Real cool. I don't see that you made a comment. I see that you talked about the boss fights. Is that what you're talking about? Oh, I don't know. Interesting. I don't know what you're talking about. You have to let me know. Yeah, that was a cool stream. All right, sorry. All right, everybody. That is going to wrap it up. Thanks again to all of our incredible, wonderful, supportive people for throwing down your super chats and tips tonight. Big shout out to Ayla, Save Versus, Shadram, Neil, GM Scott, Jonka, and the Purple GM for your awesome and cool support of this channel. It's always very much appreciated. Again, thanks you again to our patrons for supporting this channel and being the reason why we're able to keep doing this and talking about this kind of off the cuff stuff that probably isn't going to get us a lot of views, but is more than worth it because of your patronage and because of your wonderful support and donations. So thank you so much. Thursday, crap. Somebody, what was I going to do? Oh, God. I said it in the beginning. Someone had a great suggestion. Oh, Forbidden Lands deep dive. Yeah, we might talk about Forbidden Lands on Thursday. And then, of course, remember, next Tuesday, we're going to be back in the studio. Me, Bob, Smith, Nick, and our new member, Dirt, who is going to be joining us for session 0 of our root game. Actual play, character creation, map creation. We're going to do some character backstory cards. Galileo games. Character backstory cards. Ooh, very cool. I just ordered the second set. I think it's in my mailbox. All right, we're making characters. And then we draw one and we say, one of the groups might be the Airy Dynasties or the Marquis de Cat. It says, group owes you a favor. Which group? We roll randomly or determine otherwise. We'll say, the Marquis de Cat owes you a favor. What did you do to earn it? Have they repaid it yet? Ooh, interesting. You needed to confront individual, maybe the prince of the Airy Dynasties, but knew that you needed the PC to your left's help. Why? What did you need from them? And did they help you? Ooh, interesting. Very cool. I love these things. Again, I could have more fun making the characters sometimes or making the campaign using things like microscope and stuff than sometimes playing the campaign. It'll be fun. It'll be interesting. Tune in. I'm working very hard. I just spent a couple more $100 on freaking acoustic insulation foam so that not like the cheap wedgie stuff that you put, you stick to your walls. Like this is like 5-inch thick insulation fiberglass that has to be wrapped inside of frames, like real acoustic panel material from Acoustomatics, because I want to fucking kill all the reverb in that studio so that we can try to make the sound as crisp and clear as possible. Sound is a big deal for me. And while I love the freedom of having overhead microphones in our studio, because that way we don't have to have these, big booms in everybody's face while they're playing, I refuse to allow the quality of the sound to go down. So, I will spend more money until it's good. And if I can't get it to the quality that I want it to be at, then we'll probably go back to this, or I'll look into like a lavalier setup, but that has its own problems as well. So it's an ongoing struggle to try to look and sound good. What can I say? All right, everybody. Thank you again for joining, and we will see you Thursday. I think we're going to do Forbidden Lands. We'll ask the patrons. But I think we're going to do Forbidden Lands, and then next Tuesday we'll be back for Root. So it should be fun. All right, everybody. Thanks again for supporting us. Thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Peace.